morning. So we'll kick this off. And I'm happy and excited to introduce to you today Carl Alexander, who I've had.
Yay! And the more famous Carl board is here too.
He's going to talk to us today about Serverless WordPress Demystified. I was happy to meet Carl for the first time. I believe it was 2018 in Montreal at WordCamp Canada, which happened to be my first WordCamp. I think Carl.
Yeah, it was your first WordCamp. It was the first one you sponsored, I think, too.
First one we sponsored. And so for those that don't know Carl, Carl is a PHP developer from Montreal, Canada. He's the solo founder for Emir, not to be pronounced Wymir.
Love Wymir too.
For WordPress. He's also he has a website where he shares his programming knowledge. I think he'll put the URL on the screen in just a bit. It's his way to help the WordPress community with these hard to learn topics. It's also why he's excited to speak today at WordCamp Canada.
Okay.
And it's another way for him to help the WordPress community, and that is probably written twice. All right. On that note, let's give him a big round of applause. And if there are any questions, I'll be going around with the microphone.
Okay, cool, great. Yeah. Sweet. Testing. Okay, great. Hello, good morning. Thank you all for coming at 9 a.m. and listening to this talk. Hopefully your brain's somewhat awake, but by the end it should be a bit better. So yeah, as I said, you can, as Emil said, you can find me at carlalexander.ca. I write a lot less than I used to, but there's a million things there if you want to level up your programming skills with WordPress or PHP. There's a lot of content there. So I used to have this slide. Mike knows it. I used to be known, I speak a lot less at WordCamps, but I was known for doing these very advanced talks. And that's why I say, hi, Carl. I'm Carl, and then you're lost now. But I use this slide because I'm really empathetic to everyone. And the way I structure my talks, there's going to be some breaks for questions throughout the talk so that you can ask questions so you don't fall behind or you don't wait till the end. There was something you didn't understand at the beginning, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm lost for the rest of this talk. I give you a lot of opportunities to even give me questions or be silent, awkwardly silent, and not ask me questions. It's great, either way. All right, let's begin. So I thought I would start with my love story of serverless. So if you're in the WordPress space, I've been talking about serverless WordPress for a few years now. I started working on it in 2019. I'm harassing everybody at every WordCamp submitting talks about it. I love it, but sometimes for a lot of people, they don't really understand where my love of serverless comes from. So who here has been a programmer for 10 years? Okay, 20 years? Okay, 30? So yeah, I started at 8. So I started when I was 8. So I always loved writing code. I took a really important career decision early on in my career that's what I wanted to work on. I love writing code. But I was also really good at servers. And who here can relate to deploying PHP code, WordPress sites, and stuff like that? And they're like, oh, you can do that? Well, can you manage this server thing for me? And you're like, I guess. And then the next thing you know, you're like this accidental sysadmin, and when everything's on fire and everything, they're like, well, you put those PHP files on the server, you must know what's going on. And it's like, Mike's like, I feel too seen right now. Too seen. This is too real. But yeah, that was like a bit my story because I started being a sysadmin, not at 8, but not very far after that. And because I felt comfortable with it, people would ask me to just work on it. But what I always dreamed of is what I like to call like the Vercel experience. So like, who here uses Vercel? Okay, so who here knows about Vercel? Okay, a bit more people. So the thing with Vercel is it's a JavaScript hosting platform, but the thing that's really magical about it is that it solves a lot of what I wanted with code. So what I wanted was to just ship code. So like put it on a server or somewhere on the internet, in the cloud, and I wanted it to work. But I also wanted it to scale. I didn't want to have to like be on call on pager duty because this client made a sale, sent a sale email, and they're like, why is like everything on fire now? And I'm like, well, you know, stuff doesn't scale, and normally you get like a few orders a minute, and now you're getting hundreds of orders a second. And you're like, oh, but you're on the $20 a month plan or whatever it is, and then you're like, what's going on? And what I really wanted to do was to sleep at night. I wanted to, right? I didn't want to have pager duty. I didn't want to have my BlackBerry ring, whatever you were at in your career. I just wanted to sleep and know that it was okay, especially for me because I travel the world. So if I'm in Tokyo and you're East Coast and the server blows up and I'm sleeping, it's not good. Whoop, went a bit too fast. So serverless gave me that, and that's why I love it. But what is serverless? You know, the number one question I always get is are there really no servers with serverless? Literally everybody. So, and my best way to say it is like the Scooby-Doo meme, which is like, you know, are there no servers? No, there's still servers. They're there. They're there. Like serverless computing really is kind of this marketing term that I guess it was AWS, but whoever at the time basically decided, yeah, we're going to call it serverless. But it was really to encapsulate this concept that's called functions as a service, which also doesn't really tell you much as a name. But at least it's a bit more descriptive than serverless because everybody's like, where's the server? Where's the server? It's like, it's still there. But what functions as a service really means is this idea of on-demand computing. So basically, the way I think everybody is kind of familiar with servers is that it's this thing you spin up, and it's kind of always there running in the background, doing what it needs to do. And on-demand basically means that's not the case. If you have stuff, like basically if you upload code to AWS or Azure or whatever cloud provider, basically that code gets executed only when an event happens. And you'll notice that I'm not mentioning servers here because really what that means is that those servers are outside your sphere of concern, which is like really where the term serverless comes from, right? So it's not about there's no servers. It's more like I don't really have to think about them. The same way that nowadays nobody thinks about compilers or assembly code or all that stuff. Like you start moving up the abstractions. And then somebody else is dealing with that. You know, they get paid to do that. But the point of technological progress is that you can like move stuff up and then you just don't have to deal with it. Okay, this is where I need you guys to be awake. So how does it work? How does it work? So let's start with WordPress on a server. So I think a lot of people are going to be a bit more familiar with that. So this is how most WordPress hosting works. I used to give talks about this architecture when it was new in the 2010s, basically. But the way you want it is basically you have your browser, it makes a request, and then you're going to hit a cache. So who here knows, you know, Cloudflare, WP Rocket? Yeah, that's the caching here. And the goal of that is to give your server as much breathing room as possible, basically, because what the whole point of all these layers is to every time you move, it's more expensive to do anything. So it's cheaper to do this. And then if it's not cached, you want to hit the server, right? But that's already a bit more expensive as an operation. And then on the server, well, your WordPress has to make, you know, SQL queries and stuff like that. Well, it's cheaper if you use, who here knows what object caching is? Okay, so object caching is basically a way of WordPress of preventing MySQL queries, basically queries to the database, because they're faster, basically. So this is faster, and the slowest thing is that. So basically, most of all the hosting companies use something like this now. And it works great. And it's the point why I'm spending a lot of time is because it's important to know what each of these blocks does, because we're gonna go over what the transformation looks like. So serverless WordPress is really about serverless PHP, because PHP is what runs WordPress, and it's about understanding how serverless PHP works. So how does that work on a web server? So when you have a web server like Nginx, I'm getting a bit in the weeds here, but basically, let's say you're asking for the homepage of WordPress. You contact your web server, Nginx, Apache, or whatnot, and basically it's like, I want the homepage. It's like, cool, the homepage is actually run by PHP. Cool, I'm going to tell PHP, which is WordPress, I want the homepage. It's going to do all its magical stuff. All the code runs. It's going to give you some nice HTML. Gives the HTML back to the web server, and the web server is like, here, browser, here's the web page, basically. So that's how it works for WordPress. Everything in PHP works the same way. When you start using serverless PHP, how does it work? Well, it works in a very similar way. So like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about events. So if you think about an event, when the web server receives a request from a browser, that's an event, basically. It's like, hey, I need this HTML page. Can you give it to me? And the web server does its thing and returns the web page. So serverless PHP, same idea. You're running code in response to an event. I need this code to run, and I need something back, HTML. So what's different? Well, it's just that it's not just PHP now that runs without a server. It's basically the entire architecture that is without a server. So now we're going to start zooming back out again. So what we're having here is basically we're starting to swap some parts. So I showed you how it is today with most of the hosting companies. So the goal here is to start swapping all the parts that I talked about with different cloud services so that we can make this part here, the Lambda part, really scalable. So you'll have something like an API gateway, which acts as your web server, right? It's like you get an HTTP request, that's the one that converts it into the event, and then all of this is going to run. And you'll notice that there's something called a PHP runtime. So the PHP runtime is kind of like the special sauce of the serverless PHP, because when you're running code, you need something to basically run the PHP code. So because normally that's the job of the web server. So the web server, if you're using Nginx, you have PHP FPM. If you're with Apache, you can have mod PHP if you're old school. But the idea is that that's all bundled up with the web server. And with serverless, you have to break that out. So that's a very unique element of it. And I went a bit faster, but basically, what does it do? So it processes Lambda events. So it figures out what the event wants, and then it sends the result back, which is an HTTP response. OK. The whole point is that it mimics the web server. So the same thing for files, basically. So if you request a file, you get a file. And then for the PHP stuff, creates a fast CGI request, and then sends it to PHP FPM, if you know what that is. And that's also what manages the processes. So this here is the important one. Who here is familiar with PHP FPM a bit? OK, so just to give a bit of a context, because this is kind of the important part. When you have a web server, you have the web server that's talking to PHP, but you have something that manages PHP processes themselves. And that's what usually does the scaling on a server. So if here, I think everybody here has shopped for hosting, right? Who hasn't shopped for a hosting plan here? Okay, no raised hands. So who here has seen PHP FPM workers on a compare page? They're always there. So they're almost always on every, and basically that's what usually hosting companies use as the scaling metric, or like as a power metric on their plans, basically. They'll tell you like, you get 4 workers, 6 workers, 8 workers. And basically, that's how many how much PHP can be processed by the server at one time, basically. And Lambda only handles one event at a time, but it scales. So even if there's one worker in one of them, you can multiply them a lot. And you get something around the serverless WordPress architecture where it's going to be basically, I'm going to zoom it out now again, even more. But basically, you get something like this, which is like crazy. But the idea is that this part here represents your one worker. And now, instead of having it contained within a server where you say, OK, I've got 8 of them, or 6 of them, or 4 of them, you basically have infinite amounts of them. And we'll get a bit more into that, but basically, you can go from 0 to infinite, which is like the big, big thing. Because, well, I'll talk about it when I get to the case studies. One of the problems that is hard with hosting at a larger scale, or depending on what you're trying to host, is that you can go from I need 0 to I need a lot of them temporarily. And it's really difficult to do that when you're kind of limited to, oh, I can only have 8. Because, again, everything's a fixed size. You have to define your size beforehand. You buy your hosting plan. Your hosting plan comes with 6 workers, 8 workers, 12, 16. But what happens if you want 1,000 of them, or 4,000, or more than 4,000, right? So what happens then? So the architecture now starts looking like this. And just to discuss a bit what we were talking about before, all these parts serve a similar purpose. So CloudFront's like Cloudflare. So the whole point of this is to cache stuff first, so it never hits. Then you have this part that can scale, and then you have your caching here for object caching and your database. So at this point, the parts are the same. You're trying to solve the same problems. You're like, OK, I'm asking for HTML back. I can cache it. I want to ask for some SQL or some database. I can cache it. But instead of keeping all on things that are on one server, like you have the Redis on one machine, you have the SQL on one machine, you start distributing everything so that you can have this kind of scaling up and down. So, any questions so far? Yes?
How do you deal with database read-write?
How do you deal with database read-write? Yeah, so, I mean, it depends what you want to use, right? So, one of the things we're about to talk about, the trade-offs, so we're talking now about using cloud primitives to solve specific problems, right? So, for example, AWS has a really awesome product called Aurora Serverless V2. And I'll talk about it actually in the next section, but it can really scale. Like, I've done load tests where it's doing like 1 million inserts a second. So it can, there's a lot of room there. But obviously, one of the things with this is that you can 100% blow up your database, basically. It's like one of the things when I do consulting around this, that you have to, either you can get an auto-scaling solution, which they exist and they can be quite good, or you have to think about that, because you literally have access to basically, in the Matrix, when like the whole thing expands and he has like it's basically that. You can basically, as many PHP workers as you want, basically. But if your database only has 10 doors and you have a million neos that just show up, you still have 10 doors for the neos to go through. So it doesn't matter that they can split off. But basically, on the database side, you also need this kind of like auto-scaling solution, or you have to think about it seriously, like so that you don't blow it up as a process. I don't know if that answers your question.
More specifically, I guess I was asking about like, inserting the let's say like the same ID from multiple different webs into the database, right? Do you ever come into those kinds of conflicts or data conflicts?
Oh, like race conditions. So you can definitely get race conditions with this. Basically, one of my favorite sayings with this technology is that everything becomes a software problem now. So if you have a race condition in your code, it means that if you're inserting the same ID twice, first of all, the database won't let you do that because of the primary keys. But also, if that is happening, that's what it's more of a software problem, right? Because the issue is that you built a race condition in your code. That's what they call it when you have like 5 things trying to do the same thing at once, basically, and the timing thing is off because there's other things that could fall into that category. It's like if you rely on things happening in a specific sequence and it's happening from different places, that would also fall in that category. But those are software problems, right? Like when they're not infrastructure, they're not caused by basically your database. Like your database can handle it. Like it's just the way you wrote your code isn't right for this kind of architecture, which is going to be something I'm going to talk about in the next section. But I think it's really great that you brought that up. Do you have any other questions? Any other questions? All right.
Actually, I have one more really quick.
Yeah, go.
So are you getting around the file storage issue just using like S3 or?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so we'll talk also about that in the trade-off section, but basically, yeah, so the S3 acts as a kind of file storage for media, but the whole thing is read-only. So there's going to be a talk about it. So the whole architecture is incredibly, like, you're basically almost as secure as you could make it. Like, you're basically limited by just SQL injection attacks at that point, because the file system, that's how they get the scaling, is like you can't write. So like one of the common things that's actually in the next section is like, what if I want to install a plugin? And it's like, well, you got to install the plugin and then deploy it out because it doesn't have this kind of like flexibility around file system. Because you could do it, but as we'll talk, you get into latency issues and slowdowns, and it's really not really worth it. But yeah, that's it. The S3 gets the media. That's why it was off on the side. The media gets stored there, so your uploads, when you upload media, they go to S3 and they get served from there. But that's also great because you get the backups. So one of the common things like, oh, how'd you back up everything in this? Well, it's already all backed up. S3 is super durable. If you want, you can turn on object versioning, and then you'll have versioning of it. If you delete something by mistake, you'll be able to restore it. So, but nobody loses. If you put a file in S3, it's there forever, basically. So you don't have to worry about it being gone or disappearing or whatnot. Yes?
So when a Lambda gets executed,
Yeah.
hi, good morning. So when Lambda gets executed, does it establish a connection with the RDS as a database, or there is a persistent connection that keeps in the pool and you can view?
You could. With WordPress, you don't. With the Laravel, you can basically keep a persistent connection or process going.
There will be a latency when a Lambda executes. It will establish a database connection, runs a query, and then
Well, I mean, you get the latency issue. With WordPress, you're going to get the latency issue all the time the minute you're distributed, basically, because WordPress doesn't maintain persistent connections as a rule, basically. PHP doesn't. So PHP, how it works is you run the PHP script, and then it ends, and then the connection closes. Like they're not persistent. You have to be intentional in keeping a persistent connection going to a database with PHP. It's not something that it does naturally. But the latency to the connection isn't that significant, no.
And is there a limit of number of connections that you can simultaneously make to a RDS? For example, when you run a Lambda at scale?
Oh, it depends on what you have, but I mean, I've not hit, depending on what you take, the limit can be like hundreds of, like tens of thousands of connections. So it depends what your database is, how it's configured, but the connection limits is just, they're there, but every size of the database has different connection limits that go really high up.
Just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Based on the architecture that you mentioned,
Yeah, let me go back to it.
You can achieve a similar architecture by having like a cluster of containers running by Kubernetes, and you can have a load balancer in front of that. So what would be the motivation behind this and that architecture in terms of cost or business use case? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I won't do the cost thing because I have case studies where I'm going to answer that, but I can talk about the complexity.
Like they have the Fargate, right? So
yeah, Fargate. Yeah, so this will scale faster than any Kubernetes setup can, because Kubernetes scales based on like hardware usage, and this just like if there's nothing to answer your event, they just spin up a new one instantly. So it's like you have to deal with the cold start. If you were going to ask me that next, but because you're very on top of things, so I'm preemptive the question. But yes, you'll have the cold start, which is a few, like usually 100 milliseconds or something. It's very short now, but it will scale faster than that. But yes, that's an option. I would say Kubernetes makes more sense if you have a more consistent workload. This is very good at spiky stuff. So like e-commerce, live events, education, like lots and lots of things like that, where it would not scale fast enough. Like we'll talk about how fast this thing can scale in a bit later, but it's not in the same. And the amount of knowledge you need to get something that performs as well as this out of the box with Kubernetes or Fargate or whatnot is way higher. Like this is it just does it. Like and this is multi-AZ, so multi-availability zone. So for people that don't know what that means, it's basically, let's say you're with AWS and you're in one region. Well, you don't want everything to be in the same data center. What if there's a fire in one of the data centers? Like you want stuff to be in different data centers in the same geographical region, so they call that multi-availability zones. So basically, that's all done automatically for you. So with Fargate, you would have to do that yourself. With the load balancing, with all of that. You don't need a load balancer with this either. You can use it instead of the gateway for pricing reason, which I will get to in the next section as well. But basically, this is all done for you. So like the complexity requirement, the knowledge and configuration requirements are like here versus like there, basically. Like Paul's like nodding, but like, yes, like that's like one of the main things. Because like I've talked with like some engineers like at Elementor, and they're like, nah, we can do this. I'm like, yeah, but you like, how many engineers do you have working on this? They're like, yeah, we have like 15 people all year working on keeping this running. I'm like, I'm one person, I just deploy and this does it. Like it's not on the same scale, but it solves different problems. Like if you have a consistent workload, it can be really good for that. Yeah. This is the best question break I've ever had in any of my talks. Usually the first one is literally like crickets.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I love it.
One last thing that I'm kind of curious about is like log management. So you've talked about like a non-writable file systems. How do you deal with like logs and monitoring?
S3 external log systems are really good. I really like Axiom. Don't use CloudWatch, it's crap. I actually you can disable it. But basically external log, I mean, you can use Sentry if you want. I have clients that use Monolog, if you know what that is. Like it's basically a monolog implementation for WordPress done by this agency in Europe called Side, basically, but very cool stuff. But there's ways to get logs, telemetry out, like do you want to use New Relic? I mean, you shouldn't use it, but if you want to use it, I have clients I have clients that do. You can use New Relic for this to get information. But it is, I will say, again, and that's because, like I said, each Lambda function is a PHP worker. So I built this slide to show it a bit. So like you just have this stack here, and the stack can just like extend, like it's like the matrix. Like you can just like toss it all out. It's like if you had 1 million cash registers that could just show up out of the blue and then just disappear once it's done. And then the next question that nobody asked is like, how much would that scaling cost? So when I did that load test, like, okay, who thinks, let's say I had, well, I'm gonna go back here. So how much do you think it cost me to do this test, like in infrastructure? Who thinks it cost me $100? Who thinks it cost me more than $100? Okay, so most people think it's flat. So, $0. It wasn't quite zero. I mean, I was on the free tier, so I had to calculate it, but it was about $1 to do that. So it took, so this slide is basically comes from a YouTube video that I did. It was like it was processing 4,000 orders in about 10 minutes, basically. And when I did that load test, Patrick, we talked a bunch about it, but basically the only reason that's the limit here is because that was the limit of the load testing software I was using. So it wasn't actually a limit that I hit with anything, but it was just to prove a point. You can go from 0 to this, and in the video, I'm like in the admin, and I'm just refreshing, and it just like slows down for like 20 seconds at some point when the database is upscaling, and then you wouldn't even know. Now, how much do you think it costs for a server that can handle that? A lot, yeah, a lot. Patrick's just like a lot, a lot. And we actually know, because of Patrick did it recently, the upper limit of what you can get on a machine is about 4,000 on a single machine, basically. And the machine you're gonna have to fight, like Patrick's fighting for, is you're fighting the AI and the crypto companies to get those machines. So it's like you get one, it took you months to get it, but you have the one, you know? And just for context, it takes 40 seconds for AWS to match that one machine that it took him months to get, basically. So, and then after, you don't even have to keep it running. He has to pay for it all the time. So it's like, so there's that. So you get none of that with serverless. So, and that's because it's usage-based pricing. So basically, you pay when your worker runs, and that's it. All right, so like, you know, this sounds great, Carl. Like, I don't trust you. You're a sneaky Canadian. Look at this guy. You know, like how can I trust somebody that has a cardboard double of him? So, one of the things is, yeah, usage-based pricing is great. I can tell you it's going to cost $1 to do that, but I'm a financially anxious person. I'm sure everybody's a bit of a financially anxious person. Usage-based costs is stressful, you know? It feels a lot safer to actually pay for something that's fixed cost. Like you're like, okay, I pay $20 a month and I get this, and you know, it's always gonna be $20. Like it's scary to know that 1 month it could be, you know, $8, and then the next month it could be $40, and you don't necessarily know why. Well, you should know why, but what I mean is that it's not consistent. Like if you want consistency, it doesn't feel as safe. And with servers, you can just like, you need more, you get the bigger plan, problem solved, you know? Meanwhile, you're like in serverless, you're like, okay, how many requests am I getting? Like how long was the average time? Like how much is that gonna cost? You know, it's just like, you're like, oh, you know, it's not fun. Like, I get it. You know, it's fun for me to tell you it's going to be cheaper, but if you want that kind of predictability from hosting, from your costs, it's definitely more stressful and harder to budget for. All right, so this is another really kind of important point. which is, I think everybody's kind of not too shocked to hear that, but basically, this is a very technical solution, right? So, and part of the reason it's technical is because we as WordPress developers have never really had to learn about what it is to have a distributed architecture. Like who here works with stuff that's like separated, like your Redis is different, yeah. Well, all the ones that work at Pantheon, Platform SH and all that, yeah, I know you guys know that, right? But it's, most people, when you're thinking of WordPress, you're like, okay, the MySQL is on the same machine as the Redis, as this. So this is great, it's simple, but the problem that happens is that a lot of developers don't know what latency is. So one of the simple things is, let's say you make, oh my God, I'm at 5 minutes. Okay, we gotta roll. Okay, but basically latency matters, and basically if you're making, let's say, an object cache request, like if it's on the same machine, you think the cost is 0, but actually when you start communicating between machines, physics comes in, and basically it's not 0 anymore. So if you're like making 1,000 requests to the object cache, which is definitely not something I've seen a million times from a WordPress site, and it takes 3 milliseconds. 3 milliseconds. 3 milliseconds is fast, right? Like, well, you do that 1,000 times and you're at 3 seconds, right? So it adds up. And developers aren't used to thinking that way. So that's one of the technical limitations, because it amplifies what I call poor programming practices. So if you're not used to thinking about latency, you're going to do stuff that's inefficient, you know, like menus. WordPress menus are like the worst for that. Like, it's so many SQL queries, so many disks to just generate a menu. Like, oh my God, I see so many people like face palming right now. But yes, but things like that are worse, basically, because you have latency. And because everybody assumes everything's together, because we've never really had to deal with this idea of distributed architecture. And like I said, you can't install themes, you can't install plugins because the file system's read-only, so that also can be problematic if you're doing things that you should not do, like right outside the uploads directory, you know, like plugins do that, and you're not supposed to do that. The media library is a bit different, like we alluded to, it's on S3. But it is a problem because plugins just work under this assumption that everything's together, and when things start being split apart, they just don't work as well. And then potential compatibility issues. Then when I'm, you know, who loves AWS or any of those consoles? I get PTSD from my Windows sysadmin days, like if you manage Windows 2000. So you get the cloud lock-in. But that's because it's a service-based architecture. So basically, like I graphed earlier, there's all these different parts. So that's basically it. So I'm going to speed a bit more. So the thing I wanted to stress with putting the trade-offs is how to evaluate it. Because I think it's tempting to just compare costs. And like I said, who here has managed servers? Who has to manage servers? Yeah. So who feels like when you hear something like, this is expensive, you could get a $5 a month thing, you know, instead, and it's like, you know, instead of paying $30 to have the whole thing never fall down, like, you know, I don't think it's honest, basically. It's like, you have to be honest with yourself when you're evaluating these things. There's a lot of intangible costs. For me, like, my mental health, like, who here has been on PagerDuty? Like, for real, right? Like, who wants to never be on PagerDuty again, right? You know, like, it is not fun, right? Like, it's not fun. And we really are bad at discounting our time, basically. We just do stuff and we're just like, oh, I'll just fix it. You're like 3 hours fixing it. You didn't charge anybody for it. And you're like, but I wanted all the control. And it's great to have all the control, but when you're like, shit, I've been having all this control for 15 years now, I kind of don't want the control anymore, just take it away from me. Because exactly, your time ends up being valuable. Yeah, so I had another question here, but we'll wrap it up here, and I don't know if we can use the 15-minute break session to like talk more, but I can do the case studies after if you want. But oh, got it. Okay, so we'll end here with the questions here.
I guess you, with that kind of solution, you might need a CDN server.
Yeah, that's what CloudFront does.
And what if, like, someone they happen to bypass, like, for example, if there's a DDoS attack, they happen to know the exact IP of the server. Is it possible?
There's no exact IP to the server.
Oh, okay.
There's no IP.
Oh.
Like, so again, your attack surface is like, just to get a bit into it a bit more, your attack surface is what they call what you can attack when you're doing security. So your attack surface is severely limited with something like this. So I'm happy, I can share at least that, like, some of my customers work for like Rush, and they get like multi-million-dollar discounts and they've pen tested the whole, like, and the only thing they found is WordPress was out of date, basically. Because that's one of the key things with this is your security exposure is significantly limited. Because there's no file system to hack. You would literally have to hack yourself. You would have to upload the hack code to compromise yourself with something like this.
Okay, thank you. Because I was thinking that if someone knows the IP behind the CDN service, like DDoS it, and if you're on AWS, then your bill would explode.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I can tell you that obviously everybody, one of the most common questions I get, again, that's why I started with the cost stuff as the first trade-off. Everybody is scared about waking up one day with $1,000 or several $1,000s in cost because they got attacked. And I can tell you, like, I got a bot attack this week, and my bill is unchanged, basically. So again, you have to put some guardrails in it a bit, because if you're like just telling Lambda can just like, you can just be like scale to whatever you want. And obviously if you don't put a guardrail on that, yes, you can like burn yourself, but that's on kind of like you putting, like what I do puts guardrails by default for that, so that you don't end up in this scenario where this happens. But in general, I will tell you that AWS does not want this PR nightmare. They will void your bill very, very easily if something like this happens. Like, it's just scary, right? Like, that's what I meant. Like, there's something scary about it. I have no horror stories to share with you. I would be honest, like, I'm an honest person. Like, I would share if I had a horror story to share. Like, I just don't have one. Like, you see the ones on Reddit, but like in practice, I've just not seen it, because in general, yeah. So we gotta end here, but that was great. Thank you.